right, and we are live. Welcome back to the Endless Report. We are back for another week. It is episode 9. I'm Tony. Thank you for joining us today, and I am joined by Ben. How's it going?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Good to see you again. We got a bit of news this week. I want to start off with a big acquisition, actually. Speaking of acquisitions, last week we got another one basically right after our last episode ended. It was like a day later. But we'll pull this up here. Embracer Group has acquired Eidos, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal from Square. So a lot of big IPs and properties here, and we'll get into that. But it's about a $300 million acquisition here. So you have any thoughts on this just initially, Ben, right off the bat? It was pretty interesting news. I wasn't expecting this at the beginning of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most shocking part for me was the price tag. I mean, those are some really probably older IPs, but those are large names. That's Deus Ex, that's Tomb Raider, that's Thief. Like the progenitor almost of the immersive sim genre. Like to have all these companies go, all these IPs go for 300 million. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll never see that amount of money in my own life. But speaking of Embracer, last year they bought Gearbox for 1.3 billion, and Gearbox brought Borderlands, which is a big IP. I mean, it sells a lot. Every game is sold a lot, but still, that's a 4-to-1 evaluation. So that my first thought as soon as I saw that article was, this is fake.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not fake. Oh, that's really cheap.
Exactly. And we just talked about it actually before we started the show. I wanted to pull up this other article here about just kind of who is Embracer Group. I thought it was kind of a funny headline here from GameSpot because that was kind of a thought a lot of people had, I think, with their last acquisition of Gearbox was, wait, who is this? And if you look into what they own here, and I'm going to go through, like you said, a lot of big IPs we wouldn't have thought or even, have heard of that were under this banner. So after this acquisition, they are now owning all of THQ Nordic, which is games like Biomutant, a recent big game. Again, THQ's had a lot of classic games. The Deep Silver's under that, the Saints Row series. Homefront here, we have the Metro games, Aspire Studios, who's working on that all those Star Wars remakes, the Knights of the Old Republic remake. We have the Duke Nukem franchise, Ghost Runner, a recent game. I really enjoyed that game as well. And then we have, of course, Gearbox with Borderlands and the Cryptic Studios with Star Trek Online, Neverwinter, some big MMOs there. So it's a lot of large properties here, a lot of high profile, probably high profit potential IPs under Embracer that we really haven't. It kind of happened very quickly here. And then you have, obviously, from this recent acquisition, Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix with Tomb Raider. We had Marvel's Avengers and all their Marvel properties, unfortunately, weren't really successful, but all the big properties there, the Guardians of the Galaxy game, Deus Ex, I mean, the Lara Croft and Hitman mobile games, it goes on. So it is, like you said, is it cheap? Maybe the word, and maybe in my mind, again, I'm not someone who's buying companies for $300 million myself, but a lot of big name IPs there for something that's not as expensive as the past acquisitions we've seen.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's to talk about money for a second. Like you have all of this being bought for $300 million. That's a lot of money. But then you look at Gearbox being bought for 1.7, or 1.3 billion. And then it's like, okay, that's a lot of money. And then you look at Microsoft acquiring Activision for, what was it, $77 billion. And it's just like, what is money anymore? Like, what are these numbers?
Exactly. I mean, back with those Activision 100%, even back with the Bethesda acquisition, which at the time was, again, like only $6 billion, I think, but it was still record breaking at the time. And then to come in with, Activision and everything else that came after that, it kind of set the precedent for, whoa, we're really in this season of these acquisitions. I mean, we've been talking about that over the past few weeks, as have kind of everyone in the game industry, about what exactly does this mean. I feel like I said it before, I feel like we're in a little bit of a, not necessarily a drought with games, but we're in this really weird transitionary phase where I feel like a lot of the pieces on the board are being restructured. And I think we're getting ready to see a new kind of age of gaming where a lot of the distribution of at least a lot of our favorite IPs and companies are going to be a little bit different. And I feel like the changing of the market is something that really just interests me. So I'm curious to see how Embracer jumps into the pool of all these IPs and how they handle all these IPs. I'd like to talk a bit about Square and how they've handled these IPs in the past, because I feel like, unfortunately, we talk about, Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, again, Marvel's Avengers, games that have been critically, not all of them, not all of them here, but critically have been generally well acclaimed, but unfortunately haven't been deemed, successful to Square Enix. And, I'm not, when I say successful, I don't mean in terms of just a bad game, but in terms of, the, financial output they were hoping to get, the reception for that game. So unfortunately, Square Enix hasn't a lot of success with these IPs, but I do think that they are highly valuable IPs, and I think maybe with the right direction and the right spin on how we could market these, they could be much more successful in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Marvel's Avengers, sorry, and Guardians of the Galaxy are two interesting points because I don't know. I don't know IP law and all that, so I don't know if the Marvel Avengers and Guardians, Marvel license will transfer with Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal, or if that IP stays with, Square because they signed all the contracts. But I mean, talking about Square's performance in general, I think those two games are kind of case studies for me because Marvel Avengers, it seems like it would have been a really great game if it had just been single player. Like if it hadn't, again, going back to like we're trying to make everything a live service, just add multiplayer, add daily missions, hope it sticks and gets people, and that always ends up compromising, the vision of the game. And it really, the general consensus I remember, around Marvel's Avengers is if it had just been single player or like single player with co-op instead of like really kind of being built around, having multiple people playing with you, it would have been better. And then Guardians of the Galaxy kind of proved that it's, it is similar, but it's more focused. It was a single player story driven Guardians of the Galaxy game, and it did well. And I remember seeing a few tweets from I'm going to say director, but it's someone high up who worked on Guardians of the Galaxy who said like Game Pass was just a boon for Marvel for Guardians of the Galaxy. Like it I would say it probably would have done better if it came out before Marvel's Avengers because I think Marvel's Avengers had kind of soured, the people either. My first thought when I saw Guardians of the Galaxy after Marvel's Avengers was like, are they trying to whip something out like quick turnaround? But it was actually really good. But I I would be hard pressed to say that Square had really been knocking them out of the park with these studios and these IP in general. So I'll say overall, I'm actually cautiously optimistic. Depending on how Embracer operates, if they just kind of, here's money, make games. Oh, people, we haven't had a Legacy of Kain game in a decade, probably more.
Yeah.
I know
probably more.
There's been some games that are set in Nosgoth, but an actual Legacy of Kain game, I don't remember the last time. I don't remember when it came out. So that is one of those IPs in particular that if Embracer announced tomorrow they're having one of their studios make Legacy of Kain 4, or they're essentially rebooting it and bringing all the gameplay into a modern world, and oh man, I don't pre-order games, but that would be tough.
Yeah, I hear you there, and it's funny that you say I don't pre-order games. I'm thinking about the idea of I almost pre-ordered Guardians of the Galaxy actually, surprisingly, after everything I heard about Avengers. But I have purchased Guardians of the Galaxy. I haven't started yet, unfortunately, which I really should. But I really think with obviously I'm excited for some of their older IPs and some of the IPs that they haven't handled. I'd say ideally to kind of come out in a new light under Embracer, and I am cautiously as with everything these days, optimistic that could be really cool. I just think that, like you said with Marvel's Avengers, I feel like it wasn't necessarily that these were unsuccessful IPs in general. I mean, it's Marvel's Avengers, it's not an unsuccessful IP in any sense of the word when you think of it in that context. I just mean that the way they built that game, and we've talked about our opinions on live service as a service, kind of in the way where it's just with that one intent. But I feel that, especially with the Marvel IPs, and we've seen what Sony, like what Insomniac Games has done with the Spider-Man series, which obviously I'm a big fan of. I've probably said that on the show before, but I think that not just because it's single player, but the way they handle those superhero stories and the way that I think Avengers did really well with their single player campaign to an extent. And I think when you have that focus of we also want this multiplayer element and we want these monetization pathways, and you combine the two ideas, I feel like that's where things kind of go wrong, where you can't really deliver two competing visions at the same time. Versus where I look at, and not to praise PlayStation over and over here, but I look at the way they handle their single player and multiplayer modes, where Ghost of Tsushima, for example, great single player game. I think the narrative focus there is awesome, but they also have Ghost of Tsushima Legends, which came out a little after launch, I believe, and well, at least for free on PlayStation Plus, and became its own kind of multiplayer boon. And I feel like Marvel's Avengers could have done really well if they had a multi-character story, took a little time on that multiplayer aspect, and said, here we go. Here's this co-op feature. Maybe it's a co-op campaign feature. Maybe it's new, these new challenge missions. All those things that they already kind of were there. But if they would have, developed a really core single player experience first and kind of hit the nail on the head with those deliveries before they branched out, I feel like it could have been a more cohesive experience. So long story short there, in terms of this Square acquisition, I feel like if they could just come with more focused on the exact type of game they're delivering, whether that's live service or not, I really feel like, again, this is something I've been saying like a broken record. If they could just deliver this one core experience first and then iterate, I think that's the key here for sure.
Right. I mean, it goes back to the idea of an MVP, a minimum viable product. A lot of companies are putting out games. They're getting the minimal product part right, and they're missing the viable. And it just because I mean, going back, Marvel's Avengers, it's an RPG essentially. You're leveling up characters, you're getting gear, but none of the gear actually changes the way your characters look. And that's because it just so happens to be that you can buy skins. Wow. Like, yeah, I have a hard time imagining Embracer Group's going to do worse with these IPs. So,
yeah, and unfortunately, speaking of those kind of business practices where things are being pushed more towards the idea of a live service, so the idea of an NFTs, and not really how that interacts and how that really integrates itself into a gameplay experience. Unfortunately, we get this announcement from Square shortly after this acquisition here, and I'll pull it up on the screen for our video viewers, that they want to use this Embracer acquisition and what they've earned from this to focus more on the blockchain, AI, and the cloud. That's probably my exact emotion there. It's just a loud sigh, because I go, okay, what exactly does that mean here? Again, they haven't let go. Just to reiterate, if we haven't made it clear in the earlier reporting here, they haven't sold their companies. This isn't an acquisition of Square Enix. They've sold IP, and they still own, like it says here, Just Cause, Outriders, Life is Strange. A lot of these properties and Square Enix itself are still here, and they have a new strategy. That being said, this new strategy, I don't want to be a pessimist at all times when it comes to the blockchain and when it comes to NFTs, but I mean, this comes in a week where, again, I'm no NFT expert, but I know the NFT market is abysmal right now. I mean, we've seen a large drop. Again, this is not something I'm an expert in, but it's been all over the news this week that the NFT market is kind of in shambles. So it's kind of a rough, week to announce that you're doubling down on your blockchain investment for the future. And again, I'm not saying that I'm not one of those people saying the blockchain has no potential. I think I said in the past few weeks that I do see where the blockchain can be used in the future, and I feel like a lot of that is a little far out. But again, I feel like it may be a little over proactive here, or maybe a little too quick to jump into investing your main strategy in this area of the market. Again, it's not an area that I'm anyone's very much more of an expert in, other than this kind of perspective. Not, I wouldn't say pseudoscience or anything. There is a science of this market, but I think it's a lot of it is kind of up in the air and up to these future projections. So this gets me a little worried here. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on the idea of the blockchain and AI here.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I said last week or the week before about Ubisoft. Like, there is, if public sentiment, I would say if the gaming public sentiment towards NFTs could be reoriented into a more positive direction, there will be a ton of value for the first really large company that can make that work either in their own ecosystem of games or in games in general. So it's a risky play. I think the fact that we do get news that basically the NFT market's crashing this week kind of makes this more hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
It looks very poorly timed, and I'm wondering if maybe somebody there at Square Enix is going, is there a clause that we can cancel this now? Because no, it's just weird to me to
It,
see companies still especially in Ubisoft's and Square's cases doubling down or tripling down when it just is such NFTs at this point are pretty much a poison pill for any project or for any company, and it just that they have to hopefully have more numbers and analytics that are telling them that this is a good decision. And it's not just like a small group of people that are just really on board with it, tanking everything for everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, it raises a lot of points there. I think with the idea of, again, I'm losing my train of thought here, just with that whole idea. But I think when you sell all of your main companies, I mean, it's Crystal Dynamics here, it's Square Enix Montreal. I mean, you're selling a lot of your big money makers here. Again, obviously, it hasn't been successful for them in the past. I think with their thought process here is we got to jump into NFTs because it's a different market. It's different than what we've been doing previously. I think that, again, like you said, it is a bit of a poison pill recently, even before this week. It's not like that. I mean, obviously, the drop in the market this week is a bad just PR moment for them. Obviously, it's not like the end of NFTs as we know it, but it is not a good look to have that happen during the same week, of course. That being said, the PR for around NFTs wasn't really great to begin with, a week ago. I mean, we talked about it a week ago with how Ubisoft had been handling it, but how a few other companies have been handling their blockchain investments just in general. And it's not that it's not happening. It's not that it's not a realistic idea. I'm not saying these companies should be investing in it. Again, like you just said there, they're looking at a lot of statistics, a lot of graphs, a lot of analytics of the market that I'm not privy to, and maybe I'm not even really appreciating, from a consumer standpoint of what that market is. So I'm not coming in here saying, and any means that I would know better, this is a bad decision. I just think that it's something that's still up in the air. It's still something that's developing, and I think that if you could sacrifice looking maybe a little clumsy now for a moment when the NFTs aren't looking so great, and then profit in the future, again, if you could be, like you said, that first company to really hit it in the right way and really integrate the blockchain in the way that's going to click with the consumer market, and it's actually going to set the precedent for how this is going to be done going forwards. I mean, someone's going to be that company. Someone's going to be the first person to do it the right way. I think other companies are going to lose a lot of money, lose a lot of PR in the way they attempt to be that first person. But just because, me on a podcast, I'm saying I'm not a big fan of NFTs, doesn't mean that these companies don't see the money and the potential of that going forward. So I think that, that's kind of where I lost my train of thought of. I don't want to be just negative here and that I'm, against it or anything like that, because I am a little bit negative on it. But I do think that there is, there is potential. There is a way to do this right. I'm not sure we're there yet. I think I'm a big fan of VR as well. I think you are in the same vein. And I think VR in the past, I've had conversations with people, whether it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and, if VR just wasn't really there in the way you wanted to talk about it. And in a lot of ways, it still isn't there. But it is, I mean, the way these things exponentially grow, I think we take for granted a lot of the times, and we don't realize how close to, the boom of this new market on something we are, especially in the technology. So I think that I'm not going to count NFTs out. I'm not going to count the blockchain out, but it's disconcerting, I guess, at this point to see, like we said before, when we talk about live service, to see it just being done for the sake of doing it and not necessarily for the benefit of the product or the brand in general, or the benefit of, of the user in general. So I think that, a lot of times where you could just sully a brand name by handling it, incorrectly. We talked about many launches in the past podcast, but something like the Battlefront, Star Wars Battlefront launch of a game that came out, in contrast to other, games from, like Battlefield 2042 that weren't really ready at launch. That game came out really well done, beautiful graphics, fun gameplay for a Star Wars fan, but just it had that problem with the microtransactions, and just the PR of it is what really killed it. So I think that PR can be just as important as quality, But I feel like a lot of times these days we have games that are either all PR or just all in the other direction. And I feel like you need to have a good balance there. And I feel like that's kind of how I sum up all my thoughts on these things. Is we need a little bit more balance in the way that just all of these things are tackled.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here thinking about it. I think the part that has me like most scratching my head is, large companies like Ubisoft and Square and EA. Battlefield 2042 is a good example. Like they prioritize short-term gains of getting that out right before Christmas to get more sales, rather than waiting a little bit more and delivering a better product that would potentially get more sales. Like it's really hard for me to understand a company trying to shoot for something long term, which is what this NFT gambit, like with Ubisoft and Square, feels like. It does feel like they're trying to plan for something long term that isn't there yet. And I think that's also part of the reason I just don't understand it, because almost every company of their size is usually more focused on those short term, gains. So that's just
And
a
that's
side thought.
absolutely. And that's where a lot of our frustration, I think, comes from, especially in the past, of terms of like this. Why don't you just wait a second, look at the long term here and see how this could benefit, the game itself, the brand of this franchise, whatever the case may be going forward. We talk about games that maybe should have been delayed that aren't. And a lot of times that seems like that's the bottom line of getting out this holiday season or answering to the shareholders for this quarter. And when you have your entire company, when you're a developer, banking on one release, and it's been banking on this for years now and through development, you don't want to have to delay things. You don't want to have to answer to the shareholders that you're not going to see this increase the way you want it to in this amount of time period. But I think that, like we said in the past, a lot of times these decisions may pay off by just having patience and giving, the consumers the product that will hold up to what they expect from certain brands. And I think that to kind of have the opposite here, where we're seeing a little planning for the long term, but hindsight's always 2020. When this plays out, and we'll go, oh, okay, actually, maybe that was a mistake or that worked great for them. But we don't see all the cards. We just see the cards being placed as they are. We don't see what's in the deck, for all these years and what they have up their sleeve this whole time. So I think that I'm not in the head of the Square Enix executives right now. I'm sure they have a very solidified plan on exactly how they want to get into this market and what stages. But again, that's something as this being this part of the consumer market, we're gonna have to wait and see. But yeah, it's just a lot to be seen there.
Yeah, it's my prediction that this is probably the last thing I have to say on the whole Square Enix NFT thing. My prediction is that either it'll never pay off for any company that tries it, which to me is the more likely option, just because every option I've seen it presented as a solution for just has better solutions already. I think if NFTs actually make it into games, I think we're going to see a situation where one company did it right in like their ecosystem, being all their product, all their games and all their IPs and things, and then I don't think any company will be able to replicate it as well, because we see that happen a lot where I'll use Fortnite as an example. Fortnite player, PUBG, it happened, it was big, and then Fortnite came out and just like had that perfect sauce to nail it and just knock it out of the park. And then like after those two games, here's a huge flood of battle royales. All essentially the same formula, but they just couldn't replicate it enough. Like I think that if NFTs happen, that's what's going to happen. One company will find a way to do it right because they'll have the right IP, the right games, and the right idea for doing it in their own ecosystem. And then we'll have a whole bunch of companies that try to replicate that, but are missing those critical ingredients.
I think that's spot on. And I think that analogy of the battle royales is really relevant to me, because I think it's that way where you find that perfect formula like that, and then again all these battle royales come in and they try to compete, and you have some that stay, like Apex Legends or things like that, because they find their own niche kind of. So I think that when it comes to NFTs, like you said, I think there'll be that company that gets it right. I think that a lot of other companies will do it. They'll all float in. They'll all have their little marketplaces, just like everybody has their coins or whatever you could buy now and their skins. That not every game really succeeds as much as the other ones doing it, but they all have that formula. And then you'll find, a few here and there that kind of have their own niche to it and how they handle it. But I think it is one of those things where you're going to find that core system of what's the most, you know, at least on a business standpoint, what's the most ideal way to put microtransactions in here, you know, in a similar vein to just, you know, the MTX we've seen in the past few years. How can we slip this in here with the least resistance from the audience? And like you said, like the most acceptable way to deliver this in a proper way. And I think that'll settle itself out once that first company kind of gets that down.
Yeah, and I guess I do want to say, I want to clarify that when it comes to NFTs and games, I don't have anything like if it was just their replacement for microtransactions and essentially every microtransaction you had went onto a blockchain, and they were obvious about what it was. Like it is a way for you to buy something and then resell it later on if you want to leave the game, and that's it. They're not going to hype it up to be something it isn't. They're not going to, I don't, I don't want to hear it. It's like, oh, play to earn. Like if it was just literally we're using a very eco-friendly blockchain, it makes it easy for whatever reason. We think it makes it easier than just using a traditional database, and it's a way for you to have microtransactions. That you maybe if it is all in Ubisoft games, you can bring them between games, or you get benefits for bringing them between games. But like, if it was just ultimately a way to purchase microtransactions and then be able to sell them when you're done, and that's it. That's all it was. I would not have a problem with that. But it's the fact that we keep seeing it touted as a play to earn.
Exactly.
It's I don't know. It's weird because as soon as you start, even that with microtransactions, as soon as you start adding in the option to be able to cash things out from a game, it will change the game.
100%.
I don't think we have an article for it, and I think it was this week. But Reggie Fils-Aimé,
yes, coming out with that
Nintendo,
in his new book. Yeah,
coming out with this book, and he announced that he is a supporter for NFTs, and he does think it would be. I mean, I won't say he's wrong. It would be cool to be able to sell your Animal Crossing island. Like I spent 100 hours playing it. I did all this stuff. I made it look really pretty. Like, I am just like essentially an island decorator, and I want to be able to sell it. That's cool. But then it takes a game, I guess, that is really all about capitalism. So it's more fitting than I thought. It takes that game from something where like you play for a few hours, it's all time based, so you can't really cheese it because the way it is kind of locked to your time. It takes something that would typically be very relaxing and would suddenly make it far more about how am I spending my time best in this game to make something I can sell. Like it's
that's
having
true.
that as an option will change how the game feels and how it's played.
Yeah, and I think on a larger scale, not to get into a whole other conversation about NFTs, I'll try to close up my thoughts here. But I think that when you create this value kind of based market, I mean, when you look at the way that we deal with just internet data today in general, of how larger companies are basically profiting off of, tracking the data of thousands, millions of people, of everything you kind of do on a daily basis when it comes to your digital footprint is kind of being used for profit and, and selling your data habits to other companies. So I think that there is a positivity with the NFT space when it comes to the idea of, there is value. I'm putting my hours into this game, and there is value inherently to other people, digitally or, physically, whatever the value of that is, monetarily, there is value there. So why shouldn't, I, as the person, contributing that work, be, being able to profit off of my own, work hours, whatever you see that, again, with designing an Animal Crossing island. If I'm putting in 50 hours of gameplay to get all of these items and design this island, I should be able to profit from that myself, is kind of the idea, I guess, if other people could profit from it, So I think that is an interesting angle of it. I think that when you look at the way other games have handled marketplaces in the past, I think if like Counter-Strike is a good example, CSGO, the way they're selling weapons skins is like its whole own market. And I think that obviously the sense of ownership is already there, but when you bring in an NFT aspect, there is that idea of, again, it's the whole non-fungible thing to me is pretty loose, because I think it is kind of fungible. I think there are ways to replicate. There are ways in this besides the idea in your mind that I have this specific code of the blockchain. It's really not as special when you could recreate these digital items in another way. I just say, well, it's not the exact same version, but it's another identical digital recreation. So I do think that if you have personal skins, maybe you're a big YouTuber, a streamer, and you can say, I'm making only 40 codes of this one weapon or this skin for Fortnite or whatever that you can access. And then again, you can never download it again. Or if they can make it work in a way where it can promote personal, I think, money making, where it's not necessarily of the company getting all of the profits of all these things that the users are creating. I think it'd be kind of a, maybe the developer gets a certain cut, but these, you can have user made creations and a kind of marketplace where you're selling, like a virtual Etsy when it comes to like inside a video game universe. I mean, there are definitely ways this could work, but I think, like we said before, it's about that execution. It's about the simplicity of it. If it's just, here's these skins that you can trade and it's really just that, and it's not affecting, gameplay, it's not pay to win. I think that's what's most important. And I think if we could just, again, I feel like I always get a little pessimistic when I talk live service, because it's about, live service for the sake of it and for the sake of the monetization rather than for the sake of just updating that game. Like if you put it, in just basic terms, this is a game that I enjoy playing. It's a good amount of content, but every once in a while, the content's going to be, more content will be added, more cosmetics will be added. I mean, on paper, that sounds fantastic. I think it's just about when you feel like as the user, you're not really being given entertainment, but you're kind of being pulled in to kind of like have to pay for more and more of that little, feeling of, oh, I think I'm getting something out of this. I think I'm getting some gratification here because I'm spending dollars on this equipment or whatever it is. I think that's when it gets dangerous. And I think if you could just pay to win inherently sounds bad. I think if you could just inherently say, is this pay to win, and kind of do that double check, I think that's kind of the big, the check mark for where I think a live service is acceptable or not. But I think I'd like to move on to something a little more less heavy of a topic here. We have some more interesting game stories.
I think we have a pretty positive story here.
Yeah. So this is something that's pretty funny here. Some really creative ingenuity here. We have someone who modded the old Fisher-Price video game controllers to be a fully fledged PC input. So if I'll mute this video here, I could pull it up a little bit. If I can make this full screen, I may have to zoom in a bit. But basically, using this old Fisher-Price controller here, this customizer was able to run a full game of Elden Ring with full control. It's a little blurry here, but as you can see, I thought this was really clever. I love controller modding. I love custom builds like this. I've seen things, customizing the PlayStation controller to work with PC, different things like that, different monitors, but never something like this. I think this is pretty fun and a pretty cool story to share here. But you can see it's a mini USB cable here. But it's pretty funny. Do you have any thoughts on that? I thought that was a pretty funny article you added there.
Yeah, I saw it, and I laughed to myself because my kid had this controller. So it's I don't know. It was just, it's cute. It's funny.
Yeah.
The guy, Rudism, has apparently also, I guess he's got a whole YouTube channel, and he does a whole bunch of different like alternative inputs, we'll say. I think there's a video that he somehow wired up a whole bunches of bananas to play Donkey Kong. And they're just bananas. I don't know. I don't know the engineering that goes into something like that, but he has a whole. He just does this a lot. Apparently, just takes like weird ways to input into a game, and yeah, this was just the most child friendly, cutesy controller for one of the most dark and gritty games. Like.
Exactly. I think that's what the contrast of that visual, I think, is what's so funny about it. And I'm sure there's a lot of work that went into getting, taking apart this controller, editing with its, internals, maybe some soldering going on here, rewiring. And it's funny you brought up the thing about the bananas. I think some people may have seen videos in the past of when people have a bunch of, potatoes or a lime and using the conductivity of the fruit or the vegetable, what have it, and just electrical signals, with custom wire work and stuff. And I always found that stuff really fascinating. I got to take a class in college where we did just kind of, basic computer, mechanical wiring and stuff like that. And I made, a little musical keyboard just with like aluminum foil and those same kind of wires like you would with a banana or something like that. And I thought it was the coolest thing that I could basically, take that basic little, electrical shock over this wire and create like the input that I use every day. And, I think it's things we take for granted. So to see people mod with that stuff and make different versions of it is just really cool and fun. And especially, with Elden Ring, I think, like you said, one of the most like gritty, most recent games to do this. I think Elden Ring kind of has that cult following of just like what is every and anything we can do with Elden Ring. You know, can I play in all these different ways, all these different builds? So to see that take to the custom controller, aspect is really funny. And it's really cool. And I think it just adds to the whole, culture of the Elden Ring, a phenomenon that has been happening over the past few months. Yeah, so that's something a little more on the bright side this week that isn't just acquisitions and doom and gloom and NFTs and live service and all that. I think that was a really great addition. Speaking of Elden Ring and George R. R. Martin, they also I think I mentioned before we started the show, we got a trailer this week for the new Game of Thrones prequel series, with Fire and Blood, that talks about the Targaryen family of Game of Thrones. And I know it's kind of a tough topic to bring up since that last season, but I was a big Game of Thrones fan myself when it was, in its height, and I know you're a fan as well, and I'm actually pretty excited, to see what comes out of that franchise. I mean, obviously, I brought that up because George R. R. Martin wrote on Elden Ring, and people are, a very big fan of his world building, of his storytelling, and despite that last season, I am, it's not video games, but I am optimistic for that franchise, going forward. We've talked in the past how we were both, Bethesda fans in the past, and I remember stories about Skyrim in the past potentially ending up being a Game of Thrones game. I remember there were talks between HBO and Todd Howard actually about developing, instead of Next Elder Scrolls, going into the dragon not just that whole Norse aspect, but kind of doing that with Game of Thrones. And luckily, thankfully we got Skyrim, which we all know and love. It's probably my favorite game of all time, so I'm happy it happened the way it did. But I think the idea of having a Song of Ice and Fire, the book series of Game of Thrones, I do think that a Westeros Essos based RPG game is still very possible. I think with the new series coming, I think with the way that IPs are being used in general now, with things like Marvel and Star Wars really coming into the forefront of gaming, I do think that we could see a kind of companion to the TV series, maybe in a different era, but kind of having those two things going at once. I think it'll be kind of my wild card prediction for the Summer's Games Fest. We could kind of talk about that later, but one of my wild card predictions there is maybe something to do with the Game of Thrones franchise in gaming. I think that's something we could definitely see going forward.
Oh yeah, I mean, Game of Thrones is a franchise I think that would really lend itself to being a game where you are, you're just a person in Westeros in the setting.
Exactly, yeah.
And
I think that would be the way to do it.
Not the Dragonborn, not a chosen one. Because Game of Thrones is all about real people making real choices and having real consequences as a result. So it would be the perfect one to just be like, here's, pulling from Skyrim, you could have that civil war conflict taking place, and you do join, the story is about you joining up with one or more of the sides in whatever war is going on, and the goal is you help one side take over, but you could still really lean into that idea that your character is just a person, they're not Geralt of Rivia, who's a master witcher expert taking down hundreds of bandits and monsters. You're not the Dragonborn. You're a guy from a random village who was trained to use a sword, and it's an RPG. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure if you heard the game Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's just something that came to my mind because it's a game that kind of is it's based in history. It's obviously takes some artistic liberty there, but you're just a a normal person from this village who your village is attacked, and that starts the story of all these conflicts. And I think if with the universe of Westeros, again, there is some supernatural there. There is the idea of this potentially being a chosen one. And I won't get into any spoilers of Game of Thrones for people that, are still going to watch that series. But I do think that if you could incorporate, you're just a normal person from Westeros, and you're working your way through the world. I think the strength of most of those RPGs, even, like a Skyrim, even, or the things that have the big Civil War storylines and the Save the World storylines, I think the meat of them the meat and potatoes is the personal side quests and everything you do in between and the way you build your character. And I know people love to roll, they're role playing games. People love to role play. Like, what kind of person would I be if I lived in this world? And I think that if you give the opportunity for that player to be a real person, to have these, whether it's dialogue options, whether it's, choice making in quests, I think the reason I talk so much about Obsidian, and we have some Avowed news actually coming up. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I think I love, games that are RPGs that give you a lot of player choice, not just in combat and in your build, but in terms of how you interact with the world and how the world, is affected as a result from your actions. So I think that Westeros is pretty much a perfect setting to really have you be that kind of change maker. And I think it's one of those things where you could have all these different conflicts going on, and the way you play into that could be up to you. And I think that'd be great.
Oh yeah, I would absolutely go hunt down the faceless men and join them up to be a master
Absolutely.
assassin.
That'd probably be one of the
Um,
best factions you could join in the whole game, I think. For
but I
sure.
will say, I think my perfect Game of Thrones game would be something like mash together the exploration aspects of Skyrim,
Mm.
uh, the Kingdom Come Deliverance. You're just a person kind of feeling with the Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor,
Mordor.
but apply it to all of the houses. So every house is its own
That'd
Nemesis
be
like
great.
hierarchy. That would
That'd be
be
fantastic.
fantastic.
And I think that whole idea of you have these targets, I mean, you can incorporate aspects of the old Assassin's Creed games, Hitman, or I mean, even
Mm-hmm.
a game like Deathloop recently, where I feel like you had to get all these visionaries and having those characters kind of be the center of the story and the all these threads that intertwine, and who's trying to double cross who, and whose goal is this, and what battles are going to happen at what moments, and kind of how you can maneuver your way through all of the political aspect of that, I think, is what makes Game of Thrones really interesting. And I think having that, that family conflict and how you kind of work your way through that. I mean, the Telltale Game of Thrones game was fantastic for that. And even in the small choices you could make, I remember you were kind of a younger child of a house, and kind of how you dealt with the fall, how you would, basically become the leader of your house was a very interesting concept. And I think put that in an RPG setting, it's going to be awesome. So speaking of that, I will bring up that Avowed story that we just mentioned. There was a rumor this week that Avowed is seemingly confirmed to be running on Unreal Engine 5. So I'm not sure if we've heard in the past the engine it was running on. I'm assuming that it was Unreal Engine 4 beforehand. But what we're seeing here is that basically a lead artist at Obsidian Entertainment who's developing this game didn't know that they were working in Unreal 5. So I think the implication is here that since Unreal 5 has been so recent, just launched. Was it a week ago or the week before that? Just basically launched for consumers. I know that developers have probably had their hands on a test version for a little bit longer than that, but it seems that Obsidian has gone through a transition here in where they have taken their Unreal Engine 4 build and moved that over to Unreal Engine 5. So I'm not 100% sure exactly how that would have went down. I'm not sure how they plan to utilize Unreal Engine 5 going forward, where they're going to take advantage of these new systems, the new lighting systems and the way they handle textures. So it'll be interesting to see how this game incorporates these Unreal Engine 5 kind of tagline features that they've been talking about. But I'm sure it will speed up things going forward in terms of just streamlining the development process, in terms of making things a bit easier, in terms of just, I'm sure the engine runs a lot better than Unreal Engine 4. Again, I'm not someone who's developed in that platform, so I wouldn't know myself, but I'd love to hear your thoughts here, in developing Unreal, and what you think this means for that project going forward, because that's basically right up our alley of a kind of Skyrim-esque future
Oh yeah.
RPG. What Game of Thrones or not, I'm very excited for this one.
If Obsidian tries to go closer to a more RPG, if they try to be more Skyrim than um, a Fallout 4-ish streamlined Bethesda
Mm.
RPG, I'll be really happy with Avowed. I will say Grounded, which is another Obsidian game that they're working
Hmm.
on, was made in Unreal 4. So it would make a lot of sense that Avowed is also in Unreal 4, just because your whole studio is familiar with it. You typically want all the people working at your studio using the same engine.
Mm.
So I think it is a pretty safe bet that they went from Unreal 4 to Unreal 5, or the other option here, possibly, depending on when depending on when Epic actually started making Unreal 5, because when they announced it was finally like a 1.0 release, essentially, they did have a whole bunch of videos from a few companies showing off stuff they've been able to do with it. So I mean, it's possible Avowed has been made in Unreal 5 the whole time, just like a
Mm.
super early, version of it. More likely, it was in Unreal 4. Then they got an early like beta version of
Mm-hmm.
Unreal 5, and then they've switched over. Um, I will say I haven't migrated any Unreal projects over to Unreal 5. Everything I've seen though, and my experience with Epic in the past, their upgrades are usually pretty straightforward. Um, Never perfect, but I could see a big company being able to look at like the two key selling features in Unreal 5 really are Lumen and Nanite.
Mm-hmm.
Lumen is a real time global illumination lighting system. I won't go too technical on it, but it it almost makes beautiful lighting just work. To quote Todd Howard, it just works. Um, and that especially for a big open world game could be would be incredible to have as an option. And especially with a big open world game, they announced their new world partition system, which
Mm-hmm.
makes, if you are making a really, I guess, in addition to world partition, which allows you to basically create the entire world from a developer standpoint in one scene, and then it dynamically loads certain areas depending on where you're at and how far away you want stuff to load in. It'll dynamically load things in for you, so it handles a lot of that. They also added, oh, they call it large world coordinates. So what that means is a lot of engines, Unity is a 32-bit floating point origin. So you can get about 20 kilometers away from the center of the world, and things start to get a little weird. Physics will get jittery because you're moving further away from the world. Physics has less decimal places to work with precision, so things start to get weird. Epic, when they launched Unreal 5, upgraded to what they're calling large world coordinates, which are 64-bit floats.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been tests of people going out like a trillion kilometers away from the center of the world, and everything just works. Like, again, it just works. So I would be surprised if they were on Unreal 5 and didn't make the decision to switch. Um, it would just be they'd have to be really close to release to justify not switching over and getting those benefits. Especially with Nanite, which was the last big thing that Epic had put in Unreal 5, which is the basically take film quality million polygon meshes and just throw it in the game. Anybody that is familiar with game development knows that you spend a lot of time making super good looking models and then like breaking them down to the point where they're low enough polygons that they can be put into the game to run at runtime. And then I just basically says, nah, give me your 3 million polygon mesh and we'll just slap it in, and we'll handle rendering it. It's honestly incredible. Um,
It It really is. And I just put up some this footage in the background here. I put up some of that Spider-Man footage in the Unreal Engine 5 city demo. I'm not sure if you've seen this. This came out this week, but there were a few mods, since that Unreal Engine 5 in general just went live. People have been using this Matrix Awakens demo city from that, and have been putting in different player controllers. So I've seen a Superman one where people were flying through here, and this one of course is the Spider-Man one, which I just mentioned. So I thought it'd be cool to just show off the engine in the background while you talked about that. But I just think it's, as someone who's never developed an Unreal, whatever, I have very limited development experience in general in Unity, but as someone who's never seen Unreal, everything I've seen from it is been just very impressive to me. I mean, the Lumen and Nanite systems in general. I mean, I watched those demos when they came out for the PlayStation and then for the Xbox Coalition demo recently, and they're both just incredible. The way that they're handling lighting and like you said, and just the way that it just works. I mean, it's like, all right, here's the angle. I mean, I was watching the Unreal Engine 5 kind of launch stream they had a week or two ago when they launched the engine, and they were showing off I'm forgetting the name here, but their multiplayer basically shooter kind of mini game engine they kind of set up as their default setup for multiplayer shooters. And just the way that they were like, all right, here's the map. Lighting looks generally good, but we're gonna add a light source. So they added one light source. They adjusted the angles, and just the way that the shadows and the lighting and every single surface was able to react just instantly. And again, like you said, it just worked. Was pretty mind-boggling to me. And again, I don't have a lot of the technical know-how on exactly how these systems are built, but it really is remarkable. And I get more and more excited thinking about the kind of games we're going to see in a few years when people are really into, developing on Unreal Engine 5 and have that experience for a while. I think it's going to be really incredible. The amount of things we're going to be able to pull off that didn't even really seem possible only a couple of years ago with the way we've been working on older generation consoles, just in general.
Yeah. I know Nanite and Lumen, their big issues are they don't work on essentially mobile or Switch hardware or VR, unfortunately. But I mean, yeah, give it another 3 years, and I mean, as a longtime Unity user, I am curious, like, for better or worse, Unreal 5 and its feature set that it's brought to the public essentially, that will set the bar for people. There's always going to be people that want a more style over like raw graphical fidelity game. But that is going to raise the bar in general. So as a longtime Unity user, I'm curious to see what's going to happen there. But yeah, speaking of which, though, Unreal 4, Unreal 5, we have another article pulled up here.
Yeah, and I'll pull it up here. So I think we talked about this. I'm not sure if we brought this game up in the past in those reports, maybe not, but this game called The Day Before, which is kind of a post-apocalyptic survival kind of open world shooter. Been a lot of people's radar. It's to me, I've seen gameplay. It kind of reminds me of almost a combination of, I see a lot of The Last of Us kind of inspirations. I see a lot of The Division. I feel like in terms of the way the open world kind of feels to me. There's a lot of influences going on here, but this game has just been moved to Unreal Engine 5. It's been announced, but it's got a pretty hefty delay attached to that, where it's not going to be coming out now until around March 2023, even though it was planned for a later 2022 release. So I find this pretty interesting in terms of what this means for Unreal Engine 5, transfers, and essentially, I'm wondering how difficult that was for the team to do here. I'm wondering how much that's actually accounting for this delay in terms of that transition on Unreal Engine 5 from 4 and how much that affects just everything in general. So, combined with the Avowed announcement, or, lack of announcement, more so of a speculation, a leak there, it's basically confirming they're on Unreal Engine 5. I'm curious to see, is it just the support, like I think you mentioned earlier when we discussed this before the show, is it because that they have support from Microsoft, as Obsidian, has having that development structure and the support they have behind them? Is it the fact that they just had a different, more experience in Unreal Engine 4 maybe beforehand? I'm curious to see what the difference is here and why maybe this is accounting for such a large delay in terms of this game's development.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting a 10-month delay, and it really would be interesting to see what their breakdown is of that 10 months. Is it like, hey, the game needs another 6 months and we want to port it over to Unreal 5, so we'll give ourselves 10 months to do that? Or is it really like, hey, we're going to spend 10 months getting the game to work in Unreal 5? And there's already a lot of skepticism over it because this game kind of came out of nowhere, and it's had a lot of rocky PR marketing. I won't say blunders, but they've had some missteps, and a lot of people are already thinking it's vaporware and isn't actually going to come out. So there are a lot of things that could impact how long it takes to transfer from Unreal 4 to 5. Again, Epic's been pretty good about providing either migration guides that tell you exactly this will break, so do this instead. If they're using a lot of third-party tools and things that aren't getting updated, that might be something that they're having to rework internally, which might add time. It's tough to know exactly. My gut would tell me that 10 months isn't just the transition time, though. My gut tells me that there's there's probably in general just a delay needed, and maybe not intentionally, but it's coming off like this transition to Unreal 5 is the reason for the delay, which would be silly to me because if you're that close and that's just launch it, get public support, get people playing it, get everything going on, and then while you're doing like live bug fixes and a little bit of content, transition the game over.
Hmm.
So
And
I feel like there's more going on, and it's just coming off like unintentionally or not that this upgrade is what's making it a 10-month delay.
And I'm with you there. It seems like like you said, it seems like they put this upgrade into place and they probably are giving themselves a lot more time here to tackle all those other issues. I think that this game looks really promising. Again, like you said, it has had some rumors there that it's one of those games that just kind of never releases. I hope that's not the case. I'm wishing for their success here. So, here's looking, forward to hoping this game succeeds in development and hope, come March 2023, we're in a much better state to see the status of this game.
Yep.
Absolutely. But we have a few more stories here. Moving on to a little bit about the summer kind of games excitement here. Unfortunately we've had a lot of delays. We've had a lot of confusion as of what's going on here. And the big one, which we'll get into a little bit, is there's no E3 this summer. So a lot of the idea of what's happening, where are the showcases? Again, we talked about Xbox's announcement last week. We have a few other things to talk about here, though. We have the announcement of Summer Games Fest, which I'm going to pull up right now. So I think that could start off this discussion fantastic. So Summer Games Fest is kind of in a unique position here where it's been around for a while. It's not necessarily a replacement to E3. I think a lot of what these large publishers and developers are doing, especially in terms of just Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, the big console players here are all kind of gotten used to doing their own thing. I mean, we've gotten used to seeing Xbox conferences and PlayStation State of Plays and Nintendo Directs. It's kind of been something that's slowly overtaken the entire, E3 stage being the dominant force of the whole summer. It's not really something that has been realistic, because of COVID and just the way things have been over the past few years. But this year, E3's gone officially. There is no E3 this summer. So I think Summer Games Fest here is in a really unique position to be a center for a lot of, third party and even big first party announcements that I think that would normally get, more attention during just a first party E3 show, or anything, something like that. But I do think we're going to get a lot this year at Summer Games Fest. So I did find it interesting that they actually are showing in select theaters in IMAX. So I'm actually going to see if that's happening near me, because that would be really interesting to see, some big reveals in a movie theater. But other than that, I'd like to hear your thoughts just in the idea of Summer Games Fest in general and the idea that E3's kind of gone. I mean, I wanted to kind of double jump to this article as well. We have a Star Wars celebration coming up as well. So a lot of just various, different events happening when it comes to game announcements this month, not even in June. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on kind of the idea of the summer being broken up and not having that, trusty E3 week in June to look forward to.
Well, and I mean, I'm pretty sure even before 2020, Nintendo had already kind of broken off and started doing directs and doing its own thing. So they were kind of the trendsetter there. Like, again, if I put my business hat on, why would I spend tens to potentially, 30, 40, $50,000 renting a booth at E3 and sending some of my employees there and paying all these extra costs? Especially in Microsoft's case, like the big three, Microsoft, Sony, and Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, like they could just put their own shows on, and they're in full control of everything that's shown, and they don't really have to worry about like, oh, we're going to put one of our games on, and then they're going to put someone else's game on, and what if that doesn't look good? Like they have full control over what's displayed, how it's displayed, how it's presented, and it's probably maybe just as expensive as their E3 adventure would be, probably cheaper. I mean, especially because a lot of this is done digitally. Like, you don't have to rent a whole bunch of spaces. So I think regardless of 2020 and the pandemic and everything happening, this was probably the inevitability.
I agree.
I won't say I'm sad to see E3 go away. But I know a lot of people really enjoyed going, so it does suck for the people that really like to go there and be there for the the on-site experience. But I mean, in general, it. I don't know. As a consumer that would be watching it online anyway, honestly, not a whole lot changes for me.
Yeah,
Um,
same
so
here. And I think one day, I always had the idea like, oh, it'd be great to go to an E3 if I could. I've always had that thought. And of course, there are other, places to go on and game conventions and things like that do happen throughout the year that I think people will still get that kind of like, live on the E3 floor experience. I don't think that's, officially gone. And I'm usually a proponent of things that are in person. I think that it's cool to, get to, have those kind of connections and that kind of, experience where all the people in the industry are in one place. And it creates a, people, it's not just the conference we're seeing online. Again, there's behind closed doors demos, there's business being taken place, there's things that are happening to making, just in games business in terms of between different companies going on during E3 that have always been important. So that's not something I've ever been, aware of or seen in general from, my standpoint. So I think for people that are just watching online conferences, I think it's, like you said, I think it's better. I think it helps these companies kind of like really, pinpoint exactly how they want to present themselves, and they can really better react to the timing of their announcements, where you're not really just stuck with, oh, we rent out this entire theater with, we have 20,000 people coming in the audience. It is, again, you may have prep, you may have things, videos and things to shoot, but again, you could do that on a very small scale. You get one or two people who have to be saying the things you want to be saying in front of these games, and then you're just having a live stream, to everybody, just like you and I are doing here. This is we don't have a team of 20,000 people, working on this over month, So I think that when you have an online format, it just automatically you're dropping the costs of all of that in-person convention, just all that planning, flights, hotel accommodations, everything that goes along with that for an entire company is just, gargantuan when it comes to costs. So there's definitely so much being saved there. And I think on our end, we're not missing much. But I think in the larger scale of things, what I'd like to talk about next is kind of, what comes next then. So now we have, I think we have this summer now where we have, the Summer Games Fest kind of sitting in the wake of E3 in terms of that week. We have Xbox having their conference on the 12th, June 12th. We have June 9th now is when Summer Games Fest is taking place. So it is kind of a all in 1 week kind of go when it comes here. I'm curious to see whether or not Nintendo and PlayStation and some other big players, EA, Ubisoft, usually sometimes had their own showings. We'll see this year, but if they're going to want to jump ahead of that and get some, early May or maybe late May stuff to kind of get in front of that early June date, is it going to all be on that, second week in June? I think whatever it is there, or first week in June, or are we going to see a lot of stuff just throughout the month? I'm not sure exactly where we go next year, but I do know the next big event we have here is a Star Wars Celebration. So not entirely just a gaming exclusive event. This is, everything surrounding Star Wars. But I do think this year we're going to get a lot of news on Star Wars gaming. We talked about in the past shows, obviously, that they've kind of branched off. Not kind of. They have been freed from that deal with EA where they only could, license EA video games. So we now have basically an era where anything could happen in terms of Star Wars games. We've already had a lot of announcements where we don't know much about anything of the projects other than that they're happening. So I think we may see some, of these announced Star Wars projects that haven't been shown yet. Potentially, I'd probably, waver on the side of caution there. But I do think we'll be seeing Jedi Fallen Order 2, which I wanted to bring up really briefly. We've had a lot of promotion recently for the new Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which is pretty cool, coming on Disney Plus. So we're gonna kind of a return of that old era there, and maybe some matchup again with Darth Vader. It seems like they're kind of hinting at, which is really cool. But on top of that, we also have a story, where Obi-Wan is being hunted by the Inquisitors, which ties in directly to the Jedi Fallen Order storyline and is coming directly after that. So we did have an interview this week with Ewan McGregor. We had an article here, but I'll just kind of state it because it's basically really doesn't need an article to be stated. But essentially, he was doing his press tour for that show. Jimmy Kimmel, all the Tonight Show, all that. And there was a question asked about how they try to keep the show accurate to past Star Wars projects. And he had made a comment that not just specifically other Star Wars eras and that, but also the video games is something that they had to be very conscious of and how they intertwined this story with the video game stories. So I think just mentioning that in general and the rumors that, again, Cal Kestis, the protagonist of Jedi Fallen Order, is kind of around during this time of the show. I think it'll be really cool to see a video game kind of be on the forefront of the public attention when it comes to the Star Wars franchise by having this, Cal Kestis, the video game protagonist, show up in the TV show. I think that'd be a really cool transition here, and we'll get to see later this month whether that'll happen or not. And in terms of whether the sequel, if they could announce the sequel around the same time as this happening, I think it makes 100% sense in terms of that cross marketing kind of game there, and I think that'd be a really cool combination to pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, especially given the actor behind the voice actor for the protagonist in Fallen Order, like Star Wars is one of those truly like uh, transmedia like franchises. Like it makes sense that Disney, because I know when Disney first bought Star Wars, they threw a whole lot of the extended universe out as non-canon.
Yeah.
So I mean, but it does make sense that like again, if you can have the games interact with the shows, interact with the books, interact with like the animated series and whatever, like the more that can be connected. I mean, honestly, yeah, there's more constraints to make a new story because you have to make sure you're not contradicting something. But at the same time, that gives a creator a whole lot more resources to pull from, because you can be like,
Absolutely.
oh, we're making a new Star Wars game. Well, we can pull from that one really awesome thing in Obi-Wan and make that like a linchpin in the story. And then for the people that have watched, for the people that watched Obi-Wan and saw that and remember that, it'll be a mind-blowing moment. Like for anybody that hasn't, it's just part of the story and they'll move along. But man, for those people, they'll feel rewarded for having watched it and feel like they got some insight that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, like you said about them kind of deleting the old canon and saying this is not, this doesn't count anymore in terms of the official Star Wars, Disney canon. I remember, obviously, understandably at the time from, there being so many Star Wars fans passionate about so much of that content, there was a big backlash and reasonably, understandably so, that like, oh, so this stories that I love, that I grew up with, you're saying this doesn't matter anymore to like the franchise I love. I get the, the inclination where people will be upset that these stories, aren't deemed official. Again, they do exist, and it's not like the the extended universe there has been thrown out by any means, but I do think that it was the right move. It's just unfortunate that it takes a very long time for Disney to rebuild kind of this universe they want to kind of set the tone of going forward, and I think they've done that, and I think it took them a long time to kind of really adjust to exactly the way they wanted to use the Star Wars IP going forward. I think obviously people that aren't overly optimistic about what's the word here? Oh, don't overly love the sequel series, trilogy, unfortunately. So I think that something they've been learning, especially throughout their past Disney Plus series, we've seen with The Mandalorian and Boba Fett, and now hopefully with Obi-Wan, about how they've been kind of taking things that were used to be part of the extended universe, or things that weren't necessarily core Star Wars movie canon beforehand, and reintegrating them in a way where they can now use them going forward in terms of all the ways they're using the IPs in a new way. I think that being said, there are certain things they've done that are maybe blocking off certain storylines from happening because of the kind of story blocks they've put in towards themselves. That being said, it's Star Wars, and it's just like a universe full of different characters and storylines to be explored. It's not all about these main characters that we've seen a lot before. So it's just limitless potential for how much more they can do with that. And I think if, like you said before, they can integrate that going forward, like we said, I know they have the Star Wars High Republic era, which they've started making novels for. There's going to be a video game probably coming out for that, and in 2-3 years time, we'll see how long it takes to develop. But I think that you have these new eras happening, and you can have all of that High Republic stuff kind of fire on the same cylinder at once, because it's all new content. And I think that all of this other, other universe content, when you're diving into eras like this, where it's, post, sequel trilogy, but before the original trilogy of movies, if you can have these pockets of timelines where all these big characters exist and kind of play around with that and do so without blocking off certain opportunities, I think they just have limitless potential for more and more content from Star Wars on the video game front, on the TV show front, for years and years to come. I mean, for the next decade, even more, really. So definitely something to look forward to there. But I think we will see that in this upcoming Star Wars Celebration. I think that's my prediction there. I think everyone's pretty much on the same page there. We're expecting to see something from Jedi Fallen Order and that association with Obi-Wan, and also with the Knights of the Old Republic remake. I think we talked about that previously on the show before, but we haven't heard much about that since the reveal last year. on Star Wars Celebration Day today on May the 4th this week, they did put out the trailer again for KOTOR. Nothing new, but just kind of reiterating, hey, remember this exists. So I think that's them saying, this is something that's coming, maybe not in the near future, but pretty close in the future. And I think we should keep an eye on as well for sure. But after Star Wars Celebration, we do go into the Summer Games Fest season. And I think that's where we'd want to kind of close off the show today and talk about what we kind of expect from that Xbox conference, which you mentioned before, from Summer's Games Fest, and kind of from PlayStation and Nintendo and those other players that I also briefly mentioned earlier about. I'm curious to see what the timelines of this could be, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we have Summer Game Fest coming 3 days before Xbox and Bethesda, so that does make you wonder how much crossover there's going to be. I think we talked about it before we started today, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get some trailers from Xbox and Bethesda in the Summer Game Showcase, but then the actual Xbox and Bethesda are like bigger events with gameplay reveals and stuff like that. As far as Sony and Nintendo goes, I mean, Nintendo just does whatever it wants. So that's really hard that's a hard one to peg. I feel like we just had a state of play not too long ago, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some Sony games in the Game Fest. I don't know when we'll get another state of play.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what Sony's next move here is, especially after that Xbox announcement. I do agree on the Xbox side of things. I do think I mentioned when we talked earlier about Fallout 4 and how back in the day when Bethesda had its own conference, what they did was they had the official trailer for Fallout 4 at the Xbox conference. Everybody went crazy, lost their minds. They were so happy, the Fallout 4, Fallout was back. Then you took 2 days off there, and then they came back with their own conference, and like you said, went in 30-minute gameplay demo, went into all the nitty gritty of the game, and really covered everything to get everybody excited. And we're like, all right, it's coming out in November, and that's basically where we are here with Starfield. So I wanted to say that again. I know I talk about Starfield probably every week now because it's getting close to that time where that game's going to be announced, and I'm really looking forward to it. But I think that the plan there with Starfield is probably to have that Summer Games Fest reveal. I mean, I wouldn't want to report on this if it's not true or not, because I'm not sure on this, but there has been rumors that there is a leak on a Todd Howard and Jeff Keighley interview that has been circulating around talking about Starfield and the music development process there that hasn't been uploaded anywhere else. So this leak is kind of implying that there was an interview done. And I wouldn't want to validate that or get that any. I'm not sure if we can verify that at all, but I do think that would make sense for what we've seen here. So I think maybe we get that brief kind of introduction to Starfield in a trailer during Summer Games Fest, kind of have that excitement there, and then 3 days later go right into the Xbox Bethesda showcase and just dive right into it. I think that's totally a safe bet. In terms of Sony, I'm unsure what their next move is here. I'm kind of I'm worried they're going to probably announce a showcase probably right as we sign off the podcast today, probably, because given I feel like it could happen at any second. I think that having that week there with Xbox already saying we're gonna take this, I believe it's a Sunday, yeah, and then Summer Games Fest will be on the previous Thursday. I think Sony could be smart here and say, you know what, we're gonna drop right afterwards and kind of be the answer to your show. Or you know what, I think in past years we've had a state of play around this time of May almost the past 2-3 years. I think this is a lot of the time where we start to have. I think we had Ghost of Tsushima last year. I think we looked at God of War in previous years. I may be mistaken there, but I do think it's the time for a state of play. I know we haven't recently, but it was kind of more focused on some international releases and not things that were really focused on the North American market and this summer particularly. But I think now's the time. I do think they could jump in and kind of either do a late May conference, whether it be that last week of May. I think the 27th is a pretty good date. I know a lot's happening on that Friday, though, maybe the Thursday before that, and kind of just get right into the beginning of this news front. But I do think that they could be better off just waiting and seeing how Xbox plays it. But again, like you said, I think not being at Summer Games Fest would be a big miss. So I'm sure they already have plans for what they're showing there and what they're keeping to themselves for their conference. And I guess it's just a matter of which of those 1-2 punches before or after Summer Games Fest is really going to be the most impactful for them when it comes to competing with the competition.
Yeah, and doing some quick Googling, it does seem like there is usually a state of play either in May or May, June, or July. So it very well could be they could have been waiting to see what else got announced before they, put a final date out there.
Hmm. Yeah, I do think it's definitely imminent. I feel like I don't know. I think there's something about the other announcements we've got. I kind of just feel it in the air. I think that's why I'm kind of talking like that. I just feel like it's bound to happen at any moment. We're gonna get that announcement, whether it is before or after. But I do think that May, June is a super safe bet. I'd be shocked if PlayStation waited a full month or two and didn't, come out with anything around Summer Games Fest or this Xbox conference. I do think we're gonna see PlayStation and then probably Nintendo and probably some, EA and some other of these publishers jump in with some other June dates. I do think that is safe to say. But in terms of kind of wrapping up here, in terms of the content we expect, I mean, I think I've said a lot of that in the past episodes. I'm definitely expecting a good amount from PlayStation. I do think they are going to show God of War Ragnarok. That's kind of their big if for the rest of this year in terms of that's a fall 2022 release. I don't think it's getting delayed. There have been rumors that it's still on track to release this year, so maybe we get some gameplay. I don't know. I don't want to say too much, and we expect something we shouldn't. But I do think it's at the point there where if we don't get any gameplay, I think we'd be looking into a delay. Other than that, I think I said in the past I'm a big fan of the Spider-Man games and Insomniac and what they've been doing. So maybe something from Insomniac there with the new Spider-Man, maybe something from Wolverine, but probably not. That seems like it's a little farther off, but Spider-Man did have a 2023 projected release. We did get gameplay for the original game. I think over a year before that game's launch. So it's not out of the question at all to see Insomniac there. And I think we should see a lot from some studios that have been quiet for a while. We haven't heard from Bluepoint since the Demon's Souls remakes. I'm not sure they're ready to announce what they're doing next. Probably another remake series. I know people were looking into a remake in terms of the Infamous series. I know when that Spider-Man trailer that I was just speaking of came out, and I think when I first watched it, you see a little electricity on a lamppost, and I think that was Miles Morales' electricity. But everybody went, "Oh, Infamous is Infamous coming back?" So I think the hunger for Infamous is definitely still there. I used to love that series on the PlayStation 3, but I haven't been able to really get into that series in a long time. Again, of course, Second Son was a PlayStation 4 launch title, and that was a great game as well, but wasn't I think highly as received as the original two games. But I think other than that from PlayStation, I do want to see, maybe something from Naughty Dog. Again, we've heard a lot about their multiplayer project coming up. A lot of people are assuming it's the Last of Us factions, kind of how their multiplayer worked in the original Last of Us and kind of an expansion of that for Last of Us 2. And from what we've heard from it, it seems like they're thinking about combining that with the Last of Us remake, which we've heard about in the past, which is interesting. I'm kind of still on the train of that game. Probably doesn't really need a full remake, but again, kind of with the market synergy, like we talked about with Game of Thrones, with Star Wars and Marvel and everything else. When you have a brand like that, that's they're bringing The Last of Us to HBO, and it's bound to be the most expensive, I think, HBO budget for a first season of all time, and really the most expensive, single season budget I think they've ever done. So I think that they're really going all in on The Last of Us being a huge IP come 2023 in terms of television and merch and everything that comes along with that. So I think that you come back out with the Last of Us 1 remake, maybe another PS5 version application for Last of Us 2, which already got some 60 FPS updates for PlayStation 5. But you kind of come in with a whole package there with the first two games plus this multiplayer experience. It could be a huge new boon for the franchise, and I think get away from a lot of what they kind of the roadblocks they've had to deal with since the release of Last of Us 2. So I definitely think that's a safe bet there. I'm not sure what else we could see from PlayStation this year. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts, if you want to jump in there. There's a few other things that are out of the box predictions, but
yeah, I mean, just we talked about Infamous. I know, like we talked about last week, Ghost of Tsushima wrapped up its patch cycle, so it'd be interesting to maybe get an announcement on what Sucker Punch is going to move on to.
Absolutely, and I think Sucker Punch is such a great studio, and I often forget that they are the Infamous developer just because that's how I always knew them, and then that transition to Ghost of Tsushima was not again, people love to say that PlayStation it's all they're all third person single player games, but that doesn't really mean they're that similar. I mean, they're very, very different games that you're looking at there, and I think that the fact that they made that transition, I mean, you look at a developer like Guerrilla Games, who transitioned from the Killzone series, a first-person shooter, to Horizon, who's now really succeeding with Horizon Forbidden West. And to see them transition there really successfully, I think that again, Sucker Punch, whether they're doing a new Infamous, whether they're doing a new IP, I am pretty excited to see what they have next. And PlayStation also has a lot that they have not shown yet, just in terms of acquisitions and developers that they've acquired, that they've announced. I believe Deviation Games was a development that they had announced last year that they have not talked about since. I may be getting the name wrong there. Is it Deviation? I think you're Googling there. But they talked about a new multiplayer shooter project from some past Call of Duty developers. So we've heard a lot about their live service plans. They've had almost, I think, was it 5 to 10 live service games in development, which I'm sure they'll see which actually fully get greenlit and go and come to market. But there's a lot that they have up their sleeve as well, Sony, that they just have not talked about in the past 2 years or so that we definitely are going to hear about. I think in terms of other projects other than games, I think PSVR 2 is due to get some sort of talk. I mean, we've seen the announcements, we've seen the controllers revealed, we've had some talks about the technology behind it. We got all the spec lists. They talk about their eye tracking technology, the different screens, a lot of cool stuff there. But we're still anticipating a holiday 2022 release. I don't think there's been any word about delays there. I think I get very wary about delays at this point of the year because this is a year where a lot of things usually are announced already for fall and aren't. But I also not getting the sense that they're being pushed to 2023. I think, like, similar to what we said about Call of Duty last week, where there's usually a reveal by now, but it's like they're just gonna get all hands on deck. They pretty much have everybody working on that game to get that out by fall, and I don't doubt that. But I do think a lot of developers and maybe publishers and just everyone in general are in a state where they want to wait as long as possible to show something, just with the climate of everything going on right now. I do think that I think we're either going to see a ton of stuff this summer that's been left overdue from the lack of news we've had the first half of the year, or we may be seeing some surprising delays because just as, just in planning, for our news cycle and just hearing the news we've heard, I feel like there's a lot that's kind of being set in motion and be kind of set up to go off, but it hasn't really gone off yet. And I feel like we're going to get a lot of announcements about specific IPs, specific plans when it comes to all of these acquisitions and new projects we've heard. I feel like we've heard so much about what all these studios are maybe working on, but not the actual game announcements. And I think I'm ready to see all of these, announcements come to fruition in the next year or so.
Yeah, and I mean, I think around August we usually have Gamescom as well.
Mm-hmm.
So August might be a bit late to be announcing something coming for Christmas this year, but again, if it is one of those like people, some of these publishers really are wanting to be like 99% sure it's actually going to come out, that would probably be the last time to really announce something big. But
I agree.
Yeah,
and I think the biggest thing we've had from that recently, sorry to interject there, is the Guardians of the Galaxy game. If I'm not mistaken, I think last year that was announced relatively late.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe June, July, August, and came out in like October, November. So that was a 2-3 month jump from that announcement. And again, I bring up Fallout 4 before because of the Starfield correlation there, but I think that it's something that has happened in the past, could definitely happen again, and I wouldn't doubt seeing maybe a quick turnaround. I think just when the Guardians case, they had Avengers and they had everything else that was kind of weighing over that, but I think that you could have a really successful launch by kind of pulling that kind of move.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if a smaller AA or indie company can't really announce something and launch 2 months later, but a Sony, a Microsoft, an Activision, like the AAA company could announce it and basically have a 2 to 3 month hype cycle, and it wouldn't be longer than it needs to be. So
yeah, I think it's possible. So I think, kind of summing all that up, I mean, I think we'll see some surprises for sure. Like no doubt in my mind, we'll see some surprises we didn't even think of. I'm hoping we'll see a lot of updates on a lot of these projects that we kind of heard of or saw a teaser trailer for and just haven't heard from since. I think we'll get a lot of that, and I think we're kind of in this transition right now. We talked a lot about Unreal today, where I think we'll see a lot of maybe some more Unreal Engine 5 demos, maybe some more from Xbox. I know they kind of had a little bit of a partnership there in terms of what the Coalition's been doing. We haven't really heard anything from the Coalition in terms of a new Gears or other than their Unreal Engine 5 demo recently. So maybe we see some of that from Xbox. I think Xbox may have some more news for Halo. I'd be surprised if they didn't, given all of the features that are still missing from that game, unfortunately. I mean, people are still waiting for, I think, Forge mode, co-op, a lot of things they were expecting at launch. So I think Halo could really have a moment there if they try to kind of bounce back this next fall, because I feel like even through the spring they've still been struggling there. And I've always been a big Halo fan, but I feel like that game unfortunately has still been kind of struggling to really get its footing going. And then I think I mentioned this last podcast when we talked about the Xbox showcase specifically, but maybe something from Playground Games, the new Fable, that'd be pretty cool. But again, I think a lot of this year is unfortunately up in the air. I think there's a lot. Oh, no, maybe not unfortunately once we get these announcements, but for right now, it's speculation's sake. I think there's a lot that we just don't know what we're going to see until we get it. So I'm very excited to see what's coming up this summer. I'm probably going to see if I can get a ticket to that Summer Games Festival. That'd be pretty cool, but it depends. I'm not sure how long that's going to be. I'm not sure if I'm going to sit in a movie theater for like 5 hours, if it's one of those all day kind of conferences, or if it's like an hour or two, but we'll see, because that'd be really interesting as well. But are there any closing thoughts you have, or any last predictions you have for this summer games cycle before we wrap it up today?
Not really. I'm just I'm hoping early June answers a lot of questions.
Yeah, same here. And I think that's kind of what we're waiting on. So I want to thank everybody again who tuned in today for watching and listening. I think that's about a wrap for the Endless Report episode 9. I think we're just very excited to see what happens next. I'm sure we'll be here talking next week, maybe about a PlayStation conference, maybe about a Nintendo Direct, maybe something that got announced next week. But if not, then it's really up in the air coming into those in the last kind of 2 weeks or so of May about what's going to go down in June here. But I'm excited for it. I can feel the energy in the air. I'm ready to have a lot more news to talk about soon. So let's hope that it's a good one. I think we'll get some really cool announcements for sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, good stuff. That's about us. That's about wraps it up for us today. We're going to close down the show now, but thank you again for everyone who tuned in and listened, and we'll see you on the next Endless Report. Thanks for watching.
Bye.